Amina had always known the smell of early morning bread from the street corner bakery, the sound of the first taxi honks at dawn, and the sight of women sweeping their compounds before the sun fully climbed over the rooftops of Lagos. Her life had been a simple rhythm. Wake up before her boss, clean the marble floors until they shone, iron his shirts with precise folds, and cook his meals with the care she wished someone would cook for her one day. Her boss, Chief Adewale, was a man of wealth and influence. In the neighborhood, people whispered his name with respect and sometimes fear. He had built his fortune from oil contracts, real estate, and political favors, and his mansion was one of the grandest in Lekki. For Amina, working there was both a blessing and a silent humiliation. She had come from a small village in Kano, sent to Lagos by her struggling parents who believed she would send money home to feed her younger siblings. She did, faithfully, every month without fail, even if it meant skipping meals or mending her torn shoes with thread instead of buying new ones. But in Chief's house, Amina was invisible. His wife, Madame Florence, rarely spoke to her except to bark instructions. Amina, mop that again, you miss a spot. Or, you didn't cook the meat long enough. Do you want to poison my husband? Their son, Tund, was a different story. He had a quiet kindness, but even he kept a respectful distance, mindful of the invisible line between a family and the help. It was a Wednesday afternoon, hot and dry, when the incident happened. The chief was in his study, Madame Florence was out with her friends for lunch, and Amina had just finished washing the bedsheets. As she carried the laundry basket past the guest room, she noticed a window left wide open and the wind blowing dust into the room. She stepped in, set down the basket, and began to close it. That's when she saw the envelope lying on the bed. She didn't mean to pry, but the bold red stamp caught her eye. Confidential, urgent. She turned away quickly. It was none of her business. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. That evening, when Madame Florence returned, she was in a foul mood. Her gold earrings glinted as she shouted, "Amina! Where is it? Where's what, Ma?" Amina asked, confused. "My envelope, the one in the guest room. Don't pretend you didn't see it. Ton saw you in there." "I was only closing the window, Ma." "I didn't." "Thief." Madame Florence's voice was shrill. "This is what you village girls do. You come into good people's homes and steal what isn't yours. Get out of my house. Now." Amina's heart pounded. She tried to explain, but the words were drowned in Madame's accusations. Chief Adewale came out from his study, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Florence, what's the matter?" "This girl stole from us." "I didn't steal anything, sir," Amina said, tears forming in her eyes. But the chief didn't even ask for proof. His gaze was cold, final. "Pack your things and leave immediately. I don't want trouble." By nightfall, Amina was standing outside the tall iron gates, a small nylon bag in her hand containing all she owned: 3 dresses, her worn slippers, and the crumpled N1-000 note she had been saving for transport to her village. She stood there under the dim streetlight, listening to the sound of generators humming in the neighborhood, wondering how life could change in a single hour. She didn't go back to her village that night. Instead, she walked to a bus stop and sat until dawn, her mind spinning. She had heard stories of girls who lost everything in Lagos. Some returned home in shame. Others disappeared into the city's belly, swallowed by its dangers. But something inside her refused to be broken. She told herself, "I will not go back like this. Not empty-handed. Not a failure." Over the next week, Amina slept on a church bench and bathed in the public tap near the market. She used her last money to buy a tray of oranges and began hawking them along the busy streets of Abilend. The days were hot, her feet ached, and the sun left her skin several shades darker, but she endured. Sometimes she heard whispers from other vendors about opportunities, small businesses, cooperatives, even foreign work programs. She listened, stored the information, and kept pushing her tray until she could afford to eat twice a day again. One afternoon, as she rested under a mango tree, an elderly woman approached her. She wore a faded but clean Ankara wrapper and balanced a basket of herbs on her head. "My daughter," the woman said, "you work hard. Why not come and work with me at the herbal stall? You will learn, and maybe one day you can run your own." Amina accepted. For the next 6 months, she worked at Mama Beezy's stall, learning the names of roots and leaves, how to grind them into powders, how to mix them for fevers, headaches, or fertility problems. She learned how to greet customers respectfully, how to bargain without offending, and how to make people trust you with their ailments. Then, fate knocked again, this time with blessing. One of Mama Beezy's regular customers, a Nigerian woman living in South Africa, had come to buy herbs for her mother. She noticed Amina's quick hands and bright eyes. "You're smart, young lady. Have you ever thought about going abroad to work? My cousin in Johannesburg needs someone like you to manage her shop." The offer sounded like a dream. Within 2 months, after a whirlwind of paperwork and farewells, Amina was on a plane for the first time in her life. In Johannesburg, she found herself in a bustling Nigerian-owned supermarket in the heart of Hillbrow. The work was hard, but the pay was more than she had ever seen. She saved relentlessly, sent money home, and learned everything she could about running a business: inventory, suppliers, customer service. By the end of the year, Amina had not only saved enough to open her own herbal and African food store, but she had also built a small online shop that shipped goods across the country. Her product became popular among Africans missing the taste of home. She dressed in fine Ankara dresses, wore gold earrings, and spoke with the quiet confidence of a woman who had tasted hardship and refused to be destroyed by it. When she decided to return to Nigeria, it was not as a barefoot maid who had been thrown out, but as a businesswoman with enough capital to buy a building in Acadia. She opened her flagship store there, with shining glass windows and shelves lined with goods imported from all over Africa. Word of her return spread quickly, but she had not expected to see the chief's household again so soon. One afternoon, as she was supervising a delivery, a familiar voice called her name. She turned, and there stood Tund, older, wearier, but unmistakably the same boy who once smiled at her over the dinner table. "Amina?" he asked, almost in disbelief. "Yes, Tund, it's me." He looked her up and down, taking in her tailored dress and the silver watch on her wrist. You've changed." "So have you," she replied, though she could see in his eyes that his life had not been kind to him. They stood there for a long moment before he finally said, "Things have been bad. My father lost some contracts. We had to sell the Lecky house." Amina felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, though part of her remembered the cold night she was cast out without mercy. He hesitated before speaking again. "Could we talk sometime? I think I owe you an apology." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but right now I have work to do." As she turned to go back inside, she felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had come full circle, not through revenge, but through resilience. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Amina woke before dawn. The small, corrugated metal roof above her head still dripped faintly from last night's rain. She lay for a moment, listening to familiar chorus of village life, a rooster crowing far off, a baby crying in the neighboring hut, the distant thud of a pestle pounding maize in a mortar. The air was still cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and smoke from fires that had never fully gone out. Her body ached from the long journey home, but her mind was restless. She had not come back to simply lick her wounds. No, she had returned to heal and to grow. She pushed herself up from the thin mat she had slept on, wrapping a faded chitinge cloth tightly around her shoulders, and stepped outside into the early morning light. Mama Layla was already up, squatting by the fire, stirring a small pot of porridge. Her eyes, lined with years of struggle and joy, lifted to Amina's face. "You are awake early," Mama Layla said. "That is a good sign. A woman who wakes with the sun wakes with hope." Amina smiled faintly. "Mama, I've been thinking. I cannot stay here doing nothing. I must find a way to work, to earn. I will not allow myself to remain the girl who was chased away." The older woman nodded. "It is good to have fire in your heart. But remember, fire must be guided or it will burn everything. What do you plan to do?" Amina hesitated. The city had taught her some lessons, harsh ones, but also some skills. She had worked as a maid, yes, But she had also learned how to prepare meals for the rich, arrange flowers, and keep a household spotless. She had overheard her boss's business conversations, noting how he dealt with suppliers and customers. She had even learned to type and use a smartphone to send emails on behalf of his wife. "I think I will start a small food stand," she said finally. "There is no place in this village where one can buy a quick plate of food without going to market. I can cook, and people like good food." Mama Layla's lips curved into a smile. "Food is a good idea, but you will need capital. Do you have any money?" Amina lowered her eyes. "Very little, but perhaps I can start small with what I have and grow." It was then that Mama Layla reached under her sleeping mat and pulled out a small tin box. She opened it slowly, revealing neat stacks of worn banknotes. "This is not much," she said, "but it is the savings from the eggs I sell. I have been keeping it for something important. You can take some, but only if you promise to repay me." Amina's eyes filled with tears. "Mama, I cannot take this." "You can—" The older woman interrupted firmly. "It is not a gift. It is an investment. I am old, Amina. I will not be here forever. But if you succeed, I will know my hands helped push you forward." 2 days later, Amina set up her little stand on the dusty roadside that connected the village to the nearby town. She built it herself from old wooden planks, covered with a scrap of blue tarpaulin to shield her from the sun. She had only one pot, one charcoal stove, and a few plates, but she had determination. On her first day, she made chapati and bean stew. The smell of fresh, hot chapati drew people in quickly. Farmers on their way to the fields, children with coins clutched tightly in their fists, boda riders pausing between trips. By noon, her food was finished. She counted her earnings that night and realized she had already made more than she had in a whole week in the city. Days turned into weeks, and the stand grew in popularity. Amina began waking before dawn to prepare food, sometimes staying up late into the night to grind spices or knead dough. She added new dishes: fried fish, rice pilaf, roasted maize. People began saying that her stand had the taste of the city, and soon even visitors from neighboring villages came to eat there. But success, even in small doses, can draw envy. One afternoon, as she was serving a group of travelers, Amina noticed a familiar face at the edge of the crowd. It was Farida, her former boss's niece, the one who used to mock her relentlessly. Farida was dressed in a crisp blouse and tight jeans, holding a designer handbag that she swung like a weapon. She smirked as she approached. Well, Farida said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If it isn't the little maid who was thrown out of the city, selling food by the road now? My, how far you have not come." A hush fell over the customers. Amina felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she forced herself to smile politely. "Farida, welcome. Would you like to try my chapati? People say it is the best in the district." Farida wrinkled her nose. "I don't eat food from roadside stalls, but I just thought I'd come see if the rumors were true. I heard you were back here, try and play businesswoman." "Rumors are strange things," Amina replied calmly. "They can be lies or truths, depending on who speaks them. I am doing my work, and I am grateful for it." Farida chuckled coldly. "Grateful? You should be ashamed. I'd be embarrassed if I were you. But then again, I suppose shame doesn't bother people like you." With that, she turned and left, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive perfume and a silence heavy with unspoken words. Amina did not respond to the murmurs around her. She simply went back to work. But inside, something stirred, not the anger or humiliation, but the fire of resolve. She would not only succeed, she would rise so high that even those who mocked her would be forced to look up. By the end of the year, Amina's small stall had become a proper roadside eatery. She had saved enough to build a permanent wooden structure with benches and tables. She employed 2 village girls to help with cooking and cleaning, paying them fairly and teaching them the same skills she had learned. Her reputation spread beyond the district, and travelers began stopping by just to eat her food. Then came the day everything changed. A businessman from the capital city stopped by while on his way to a construction project in the area. He was impressed not only by the taste of the food, but by how organized Amina's business was. He offered her a deal, cater for his workers on the project site for 6 months, with payment up front for each week. It was an opportunity beyond anything she had imagined. With the money she earned, Amina bought new cooking equipment, expanded her menu, and began supplying local shops with packaged snacks she had developed. She even started traveling to the city to source better ingredients. And with each visit, her confidence grew. On one such trip, while walking through the bustling market streets of the city, she saw someone across the road. It was her former boss, Mr. Kamal. He looked different, thinner, with a worried crease on his forehead. She overheard him arguing with a supplier about unpaid debts. Amina did not approach him. Not yet. That night, as she rode the bus back to the village, she thought about how life had turned. A year ago, she had been the one standing in front of him, powerless, with nowhere to go. Now, she held the power, though she did not yet know how she would use it. Her time was coming, and when it did, she would make sure he remembered the day he threw her out. The village had changed since Amina first returned. Not in buildings or roads, for those remained modest and uneven, but in the way people looked at her. Where once she had been the girl who had left for the city with nothing, now she was the woman who had built something from almost nothing. Children waved when she passed, and shopkeepers greeted her with nods of respect. Some whispered about her in corners, speculating how a village girl had managed to amass wealth so quickly. Amina, however, never let herself be carried away by pride. Each morning, she rose before the sun, preparing food, checking her stock, and planning her deliveries. The business had grown beyond the roadside eatery. She now supplied local stores with packaged snacks, spices, and cooked meals. A few drivers, whom she employed, handled deliveries to nearby towns. Her name began circulating not just in the village, but in the markets of the neighboring counties. She was a rising entrepreneur, and she knew it. One afternoon, as she was supervising the packing of freshly prepared siyah skewers for shipment to the city, her phone rang. It was a number she did not recognize. She hesitated before answering. Amina? The voice was strained, nervous. It's Tun, the son of Chief Adewale. Her hand tightened around the phone. Tun? What is it? There was a long pause. Finally, he spoke, almost in a whisper. We need help. My father, he has lost everything. The mansion, the contracts, the accounts. Madame Florence, she doesn't know where to turn. I heard about your business. I thought maybe you could help. Amina's mind raced. She remembered the day she had been thrown out, the humiliation, the fear, the tears. But she also remembered the patience, the hard work, the days and nights she had spent building something with her own hands. A part of her wanted to refuse, to let them face the consequences of their arrogance. But another part, the part that had always believed in justice, fairness, and sometimes mercy, paused. You want me to help your family? She asked cautiously. Yes, I know it's asking a lot, he said, but I don't know who else to turn to. Amina took a deep breath. Come tomorrow. I will consider it. When Tund arrived, Amina met him outside her small office, dressed in her tailored Ankara suit, her hair braided neatly. He looked nervous, out of place among her thriving little operation. I didn't expect this, he said, looking around at the organized tables, the neatly packed goods, the uniformed staff moving with purpose. It's impressive. Amina smiled faintly. Thank you, but let's talk about your situation. Tell me everything. Tun swallowed, then began recounting the downfall of his father's empire, a series of bad investments, coupled with corruption and betrayal by trusted partners, had left them penniless. The mansion was under threat of repossession, and their debts were mounting. He had even slept in a small guest room at a relative's house, because there was no other place to stay. Amina listened quietly, weighing her options. She could refuse. She could turn away, as the city had often taught her to do when personal risk loomed. But instead, she felt a strange mixture of curiosity and responsibility. After all, this was a test, not just of their humility, but of her own power. Here's what I will do, she said finally. I can help, but not for free. We will make a plan. Your father's debts will be restructured, but only if you and your family cooperate. You must listen to my guidance, follow instructions, and contribute what you can. Do you understand? Tun nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Anything you say. The next few weeks were intense. Amina brought in her drivers to help move the Adewale family's few remaining belongings, negotiated with suppliers, and even met with the chief's former business partners to salvage what could be salvaged. Tund and his mother, initially proud and hesitant, had to swallow their pride as they followed her directives. Madame Florence was resistant at first, her voice dripping with sarcasm and barely hidden resentment. I never thought I'd take orders from someone I once considered my servant, she muttered one afternoon as Amina instructed them on how to categorize their remaining assets. Amina paused, then replied calmly, Life teaches lessons, madam. Some are harsh, but they can be valuable if we listen. Slowly, Madame Florence began to see the wisdom in Amina's methods. The debts began to reduce, the old contracts were salvaged, and some business contacts reopened lines of credit. Word of Amina's skills spread beyond the village. Local entrepreneurs began seeking her advice, and her reputation soared. Then came the turning point. One morning, Amina received news that a major investor from Lagos was visiting the village. He had heard about her enterprise and was interested in a partnership that could expand her distribution network nationwide. Amina realized this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She invited the investor to her office and presented her vision, a chain of food and herbal stores supplied by local farmers, employing young women from villages like hers. Her plan was detailed, professional, and compelling. The investor, impressed by her clarity and drive, immediately agreed to a partnership, providing substantial capital for expansion. With a new investment, Amina's business grew exponentially. She opened multiple outlets in nearby towns, hired more staff, and created a logistics network that rivaled even some small city enterprises. The village looked at her in awe. The girl who had been thrown out of Lagos was now a force in her own right, transforming lives and creating opportunities for others. Through it all, Tund remained close, helping in whatever way he could. Slowly, his respect and admiration for Amina grew, mingled with a quiet affection that neither of them acknowledged openly. For her part, Amina appreciated sincerity and willingness to learn, but she remained cautious. Her focus was on her business, on building a life of independence and strength. The final twist of fate came one evening when a local reporter, hearing about Amina's remarkable rise, decided to feature her in a story about women entrepreneurs changing the face of rural commerce. The article, filled with her story from hardship to success, included photographs of her standing proudly in front of her expanded store, her staff lined up neatly behind her, and her eyes gleaming with quiet confidence. When the story reached Lagos, it did not take long for Chief Adewale and Madame Florence to see it. The old mansion they had once owned was now a shadow of its former glory, and they were forced to confront the fact that the girl they had scorned had not only survived but thrived far beyond their reach. Amina, aware of the article's impact, did not gloat. Instead, she quietly walked into her office the next morning, took a seat behind her desk, and reflected on how far she had come. She had started with nothing, endured betrayal and humiliation, and built a life defined by skill, perseverance, and integrity. She realized then that true power was not in wealth alone, but in the ability to rise above past suffering, to create opportunities not just for oneself but for others, and to turn misfortune into a stepping stone rather than a trap. And somewhere deep inside, she allowed herself a small smile, knowing that the day she had been thrown out of that mansion was the very day that had set her on this extraordinary path. The day Amina decided to return to Lagos in person was sunny but humid. She had been planning this visit for weeks, not out of revenge, but to see how far she'd come and, perhaps, to test herself against the ghosts of her past. She rented a small but sleek car from her logistics company, the leather seats warm beneath her as she drove past the familiar streets that once felt like a maze of obstacles and humiliation. As she approached the gates of the mansion where she had once served, memories flooded her mind. The polished marble floors, Madame Florence's sharp tongue, and the way her small frame had felt invisible in that vast house. She parked at the edge of the driveway, her eyes taking in the building that had once seemed a fortress of wealth. It looked the same from the outside, yet somehow smaller, diminished, not by structure, but by the absence of the life and power she once thought unassailable. The security guard recognized her instantly. "You're Amina? His voice was unsure, almost reverent. Yes, she said calmly, handing over a card. Swift Hands Logistics. I have a delivery from Madame Florence. She'll want to sign off personally. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Right this way, ma. Amina stepped into the house, feeling a mix of nostalgia and quiet satisfaction. The familiar scent of expensive perfumes mingled with polished wood, but now it held a hollow note. She was no longer the timid, barefoot maid. She walked with the poise of someone who had weathered storms and come out stronger. Madame Florence appeared in the foyer, a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and apprehension crossing her face. She had aged in the years since Amina left. Lines around her eyes, the faint tremble in her hands as she held the contract. Amina, she whispered, almost not daring to speak. Yes, madam. Amina said smoothly, your delivery is complete. Please sign here. She handed over the documents and waited. Madame Florence's eyes scanned the paperwork, then flicked to Amina, taking in the tailored suit, the confidence, and the aura of success. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, as if searching for the words that might explain the impossible truth before her. This is yours, she stammered, gesturing vaguely at the car outside, the neatly packed goods, the uniformed staff who had followed Amina in. Yes. Amina replied simply, It's been a year of hard work, planning, and perseverance. You threw me out of your house, madam, but that didn't stop me. I kept going. The tension was thick, a mixture of shame, awe, and disbelief radiating from Madame Florence. For a moment, Amina considered letting the past dictate her words, letting anger or gloating slip, but she chose calm instead. True triumph, she realized, required no words. Tund appeared at the doorway then, hesitant, eyes wide. Amina? He swallowed. I never realized. I knew you were good, but this... It's been a long journey, Amina said, and I've learned that nothing lasts forever, especially pride and arrogance. Madame Florence's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew she had been outplayed, not by tricks or cunning, but by determination, intelligence, and resilience. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that the girl she had scorned had become a force she could no longer control or belittle. Amina handed her a small envelope. Inside was a business proposal, offering Madame Florence a chance to collaborate in a legal and fair partnership. It wasn't charity. It was opportunity. If she had humility enough to accept it. Madame Florence hesitated. Her pride warred with her desire to salvage some dignity. Finally, she took the envelope, nodding slightly. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I ask, Amina replied, turning to leave. Outside, her staff waited, ready to transport the delivery. Tund followed her, speaking softly. Amina, I'm proud of you. I never understood before, but now I see you're incredible. Amina gave a small smile. Thank you, Tund. But remember, this isn't about being incredible. It's about refusing to be broken. As she stepped out into the sunlight, Amina looked around the familiar streets of Lagos, the city that had once seemed impossible, and realized that she had transformed not just her life, but the way others perceived possibility itself. In the weeks that followed, Swift Hands Logistics grew exponentially. Word of Amina's return and success spread across the city, earning media attention. Young women in particular saw her as a symbol of hope, proof that resilience, intelligence, and hard work could defy the harshest odds. But the most satisfying moment came quietly. One afternoon, as Amina inspected a new batch of goods, she received a call from Tund. Amina, I spoke to my mother. She wants to meet you properly, to apologize. She's realized the mistake she made. Amina agreed to meet them at a local cafe. The meeting was formal but sincere. Madame Florence, humbled, admitted her arrogance, her disdain, and the pain she had caused. She thanked Amina for her patience, wisdom, and generosity. It's not about revenge, Amina said softly. It's about growth. We all have our journeys. Yours was to learn humility. Mine was to learn resilience. By the end of the year, Amina had expanded her business into multiple towns, trained dozens of young women, and secured contracts that would sustain her company for years to come. The village she had come back to was no longer just a backdrop of hardship. It had become a network of support, community, and opportunity. One evening, standing on the balcony of her new office in Acadia, looking out at the bustling city lights below, Amina thought back to the days she had been thrown out of that mansion. The fear, the humiliation, the uncertainty, all seemed distant now. She had survived, thrived, and transformed herself. The girl who once had nothing now had everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. And in that quiet moment, she realized something profound. Success was sweetest not when it was shown off or gloat-worthy, but when it was lived fully with dignity, grace, and an open heart. The story of the poor maid who had been thrown out and returned richer than her former boss was no longer just hers. It had become legend, whispered in village markets, celebrated in small towns, and written about in city newspapers. Young girls who once thought the world was too harsh for them now saw Amina as proof that determination and integrity could carve a path through even the most unforgiving circumstances. And somewhere deep inside, Amina allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had not only survived the storm, she had become the storm that reshaped the world around her. The mansion, once a symbol of her humiliation, now stood as a testament to her journey, a reminder that power shifts, fortunes change, and those who are underestimated can rise higher than anyone ever imagined. Amina turned back to her office, her heart steady, her mind sharp, and her spirit unbroken. She had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true triumph is measured not by wealth or status alone, but by the courage to rise, the wisdom to grow, and the grace to hold your head high, no matter how the world had tried to bend you. And in that triumph, she knew, lay the promise of an even brighter future, one she would continue to build, brick by brick, with hands that had once been considered powerless.